All right, let's dive into one of America's most chilling and, honestly, most bizarre unsolved cases. This is the story of an anonymous writer who held an entire town hostage with, believe it or not, nothing more than a pen and some paper.
Just imagine for a second you go to your mailbox and you find a letter with that message inside. No signature, no return address. Just a promise, a threat to expose your deepest secrets. Well, for the people living in Circleville, Ohio, this wasn't imagination. It was a terrifying reality.
So, the story starts back in 1976. Circleville is your typical, small, quiet American town. But that peace was about to be completely shattered by a series of poison pen letters that would literally tear the community apart, turning neighbor against neighbor.
The first person to get one of these letters was a woman named Mary Gillespie. The letters were written in this really distinct, blocky handwriting, and they accused her of having an affair with a superintendent of schools. Pretty soon, her husband Ron started getting them too. These threats became this constant, terrifying thing in their lives. But this thing, it just blew up way beyond one family. The writer seemed to know everything about everyone. We're talking private affairs, supposed corruption and local government, you name it. The letters just spread like wildfire, and this deep, dark paranoia set in. I mean, who could you possibly trust when some hidden authors seem to know all of your secrets?
The fear and the intimidation were already bad enough, right? But this wasn't just some simple, twisted harassment campaign. The writer's threats were about to cross a terrifying line into actual, real-world violence. So, one evening in August of '77, Ron Gillespie gets a phone call. His family's convinced it was from the letter writer, and Ron was enraged. He grabs his pistol, jumps in his truck, and just speeds off, apparently to confront whoever was tormenting his family. A little while later, his truck was found crashed into a tree, and Ron was dead. So, officially, the coroner rules Ron's death an accident, saying maybe alcohol was involved. But here's the thing. His gun had been fired once, and his family swore he wasn't drunk. They were absolutely convinced the writer had lured him out there to his death, turning a written threat into a fatal reality. After Ron's death, you'd think the investigation would heat up, but the case just went cold. The letters kept coming, the fear was still there, but for 6 long years, from 1977 all the way to 1983, there were no real answers. And then, finally, investigators got the break they so desperately needed. After all those years of terror, a really shocking discovery would finally give the police their first piece of actual physical evidence, and a name to go with it. Mary Gillespie is out driving her bus route one day, and she sees this crude, threatening sign targeting her daughter. So she goes to tear it down, and she finds a box. And inside that box is a pistol, rigged to fire the second the box was moved. It's a miracle, but the trap actually malfunctioned, and now the police had the weapon. And from there, everything just seemed to click into place for the investigators. The gun was traced back to Paul Freshour, who was Mary's former brother-in-law and was known to dislike her. Then, a search of his house turns up similar writing materials. It felt like a slam dunk. He was arrested, convicted of attempted murder, and sent to prison. The case, it seemed, was finally closed. But it wasn't. Because just when the entire town of Circleville thought they could finally breathe a sigh of relief, the story took its most baffling, mind-bending turn yet.
And this, right here, is the question at the absolute heart of this whole mystery. Paul Freshour was behind bars. He's in a maximum security prison, under constant supervision. And yet, the letters, they didn't stop.
It's unbelievable, but the letters just kept coming. For years, people in town, reporters, even Freshour himself, received new messages in that same blocky handwriting. And get this, they were postmarked from Columbus, right near the prison. Freshour insisted the whole time that he was being framed, that the real writer was still out there, tormenting the town and making sure he stayed locked up. Despite this baffling reality, Paul Freshour spent 10 years in prison. He was finally paroled in 1994, but his name was never cleared. He passed away still proclaiming his innocence, leaving the central paradox of this whole case totally unresolved. So, after all these decades, where does that leave us? Well, the Circleville case is still officially closed, but intellectually, it is wide open, just filled with all this conflicting evidence and these really haunting questions.
The whole case really hinges on this perfect contradiction. On one hand, you've got some pretty damning evidence against Freshour. He had a motive, the gun was traced directly to him, and they found similar supplies in his house. But on the other hand, you have this massive, undeniable problem. The letters kept coming while he was locked up tight in prison. How do you explain that?
And this just opens up a whole can of worms, doesn't it? I mean, was there more than one person writing these things? Did some copycat take over after Freshour was arrested? The handwriting was analyzed over and over, but it never provided a truly conclusive match. Some people even whispered that someone inside the investigation might have been involved. The questions are just endless.
So, what kind of person does this? Well, psychologically, the writer seems to have been this kind of self-appointed moral vigilante, Someone who felt they had the right to judge and punish their neighbors for what they saw as sins. Their weapon wasn't a gun, it was the fear and shame that comes from having your private life exposed to everyone.
And that leaves us with one last thought. The Circleville writer used anonymity and public shame to terrorize a community over 40 years ago. Today, with the internet, that same power is available to pretty much anyone with a keyboard. So, is the real legacy of this unsolved mystery a warning about a kind of anonymous cruelty that has only gotten easier and more common with time?